Hello my beautiful book besties, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Liv, and in this video we're going to chat all about reading slumps. So the reason I decided to make this video kind of on a whim is because I have noticed a lot of people in the community talking about being in a reading slump, specifically right now. And I think the reason being is because we're in that weird phase where we're not quite in spring yet, but we're also sick of winter. But like, when is it acceptable to read spring books? I myself am in that phase right now, so I feel like it's even more relevant and personal to me. It is currently snowing outside and it never snows here. And yesterday it felt like spring. So I am just all sorts of confused. I'm definitely a mood reader. I like to read with the seasons, but usually around this time of year is when I just want like a very fast-paced, a very easy to read type of book. So if you currently are in the same position as me, I'm going to be sharing a couple tips and tricks with you to get out of a reading slump, but also just some of my all-time favorite books. There's definitely a wide variety here, something for everyone to pick up depending on what you're in the mood for. So I hope these book recommendations are helpful for you, but let's just go ahead and get started. My first tip to get out of a reading slump is reread. I feel like that is nothing new to a lot of us. I feel like that is the #1 recommendation, is when you are in a slump, just reread a favorite book. But what I also suggest is not only rereading a favorite book, but reread it in a different format. So if you've only read a book physically, maybe try to read it by audio or ebook. But one of my personal comfort reads is definitely The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is a very short book. I know this is fantasy and a lot of you are probably intimidated by it, but I am telling you, if you listen to the Andy Serkis narration, he plays the character of Gollum, it is going to completely bring alive the story for you and just make you fall in love with reading and storytelling again. So I encourage you to definitely pick up a comfort read and find maybe a special audio narration. This book I would definitely consider a spring transitional read, so I feel like this would be the perfect time to pick it up. It's full of adventure and humor. It is so wholesome, it's a classic, it's so heartwarming, and I absolutely love it. Definitely one of my favorite comfort reads. Not only could you switch things up with an audio, but like I said, find a different format, and that could also mean an illustrated edition. We now have this beautiful illustrated edition of The Hunger Games, and the second one is also coming soon, which I am so excited about. If you have something with pictures, that is just going to bring the story to life for you even more. It's also going to help you feel like you're reading even faster. Hunger Games is definitely a comfort read for me. Yes, the story is very brutal and very sad, but there is something about The Hunger Games that I absolutely love. It's just very nostalgic. So if you could pick a nostalgic read, maybe even something that you read when you were 5 to 10 years old, it could be something very simple, but just something that makes you fall in love with reading again. We are getting a lot of these illustrated editions, so I would definitely maybe find your favorite book and just explore different formats of that favorite book. Once again, a nostalgic read for me is definitely the Harry Potter series. We now have, I think, 5 or 6 illustrated of these, as well as this interactive Mina Lima version, which is so cool. There's notes you can pull out and things to turn and all types of mixed media. It definitely keeps you intrigued in the story, not only visually, but by holding things in your hands, I feel like is a huge part of keeping you entertained and focused while you read. Illustration is just gonna make one of your favorite stories come to life. There is nothing better than a good reread. So I highly recommend trying out either one of these. And then we have A Court of Thorns and Roses, which you probably know I was going to mention at some point, because in case you weren't aware, they have a full cast audio. Not only that, but I forget what it's called, where there's sound effects and there's music and there's all these different things. That brought this series to me to life so much, and it's highly entertaining. I have a hard time believing anyone could be bored with that type of narration and sound effects and just so much going on. So if you have not experienced those audiobooks yet for this series, I highly recommend. Next, I have a couple fantasy books to recommend you, and that's probably no surprise. I am a fantasy girly through and through. That is my #1 recommendation, my #1 genre, and I have just a couple fast-paced fun fantasy where if you have not tried these out yet, or even if you are new to fantasy, I would definitely try these out. The first one being Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. Not only is this less than 300 pages, but it is full of surprises and the romance is super sweet. This does read more region urgency if you are in that spring mindset but don't completely want a spring book yet. This is about our sweet character Theodora. She is so innocent and so sweet, but unfortunately she is cursed by a dark fae, and from there we kind of unfold the whole story. Why did he curse her? What's gonna happen? Not only is this book easy to fly through, but it's very addictive writing, it's short, and there are some good plot twists in it. So this is also a 4-book series or 3 books, but if you're wanting to stick to one quick fantasy as a standalone, you could definitely do that with this one. Next, you guys know I will rant about this series or this duology for the rest of my life. That is Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. I know that this series is so overhyped and it's so over talked about, but truly, let me just say, you do not have to be a fantasy reader whatsoever to enjoy this series. It flies by so quickly and her writing just completely sucks you in. Iris and Roman are the perfect couple. He ends up being able to write notes to her through this wardrobe, which also kind of gives off Chronicles of Narnia vibes. All of the fantasy elements are easy to understand. This is not going to take a lot of brain power, and you are going to fly through this. So like I said, this is going to be perfect for a reading slump, especially if you are a romance reader. The next fantasy duology I'm going to recommend is, again, it's a duology. You don't have to commit a lot of time or a lot of effort into a 8 to 10 book series, and it's very, very, very fast paced. This is a young adult series called Heartless Hunter and Rebel Witch. The series is actually called the Crimson Moth series. This is about a witch and a witch hunter, and I feel like that's kind of all you need to know going into this. It is brutal, but it is also super crazy fast paced from page 1. It's kind of dark, there's plot twists, there's a love triangle, there's just so many things happening in this duology, and no, I cannot vouch for Rebel Witch because I have not read it yet. But I 100% recommend Heartless Hunter because it was on my top 3 of last year. If you love balls and Regency vibes, but also dark witchy things and magic, this will definitely be the duology for you to try out. Speaking of fast-paced, insane mystery vibes, we have an oldie but a goodie, one that I read last year and it ended up on my top favorites of the year. That is the Stalking Jack the Ripper series. I could not believe I slept on this series for so long. This book is a young adult historical fiction book, but I will say it felt very real because Jack the Ripper was a real serial killer. Our main character is trying to capture him, but there was definitely an ending that shocked me to my core and I still think about to this day. But if you want something that is kind of bloody, that's upbeat, that's fast paced, it's a little bit spooky or scary, but also has kind of like those Victorian vibes, this book is going to be absolutely perfect. It is also very short. I think I flew through this book in 1 or 2 days. Another book that I flew through in literally one sitting is The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I've not continued on with this series, but like I said, it is a very, very fast read, but this book was such a great pace. It's essentially like Criminal Minds but with teenagers, where they all have some type of special ability or some type of specialty, and they are hired on with the police to hound down all of these criminals. Of course, our main character has some type of ulterior motive and she's actually trying to find her missing mother. So a lot happens in this book. The ending was wild. I did not expect it to get that dark. I felt like for a young adult I was not expecting that, but honestly it was so much fun. So I cannot wait personally to continue with this series. If you want something quick, something easy that's gonna hold your attention the whole way, this series is definitely gonna be it. Another young adult author I feel like is very popular but also worth mentioning is Holly Jackson. We have A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which you could read and then you could watch the Netflix TV show, or you could go with the reappearance of Rachel Price, which is actually my favorite. When I first read this back in the day, it was a 3-star for me. Start with this book because even though it is long, there's plenty of mixed media and the audiobook is also phenomenal. We have these people that are filming a documentary about the disappearance of Rachel Price, but then Rachel Price may or may not come back into the picture, and then you follow her daughter who is trying to uncover all the steps of how her mother got back and what happened. And there's nothing more satisfying than reading a series or reading a book when there's an adaptation. I feel like that's motivation enough for me to finish a book. So unfortunately we don't have an adaptation of this yet, but this TV series was a really good time. The next books I have to recommend are obviously mystery thrillers. I feel like that is the #1 genre if you really want to get out of a reading slump, and for that I definitely recommend any of Freida McFadden's books. I would definitely recommend trying to start with The Housemaid if you can get a hold of it. There is 2 other books in that series, so if you finish the first one you could fly through the other 2 as well. It is is following the same main character. But I recently read The Crash by Frida McFadden and really loved this one. It is a wintry thriller, so if you are wanting something that fits the mood, like right now it is flurries outside. A lot of her books though can explore some dark topics, so I would definitely check those content warnings before you do pick up any of her books. And while a lot of Frida's books can be predictable, I feel like they are so bingeable. And another one of my favorite authors is Riley Sager. I'm pretty sure that comes as no surprise to you as well because he is such a popular author, but Home Before Dark is probably my top favorite, as well as The Only One Left. The Only One Left is very coastal vibes and there's a lot of plot twists with that one. This one though is like a book within a book and there's a lot of mixed media. There's also a lot of spooky or paranormal elements to this because it is kind of like a haunted house. I feel like this is a book where you're not sure what's real, what's not real, but truly any of Riley Sager's books are great to pick up. The Last Time I Lied and The Only One Left, as well as this one, are probably my top 3 favorites, so I would start there if I were you, but that's just my personal opinion. If you have not read a Riley Sager, what are you waiting on? If you're also a Home Before Dark fan, can I recommend you Darcy Coates. The Haunting of Ashburn House was my very first book that I ever read from this author, and I went down a whole rabbit hole after that. This book is the perfect cozy vibes where we're following one main character and she moves to this estate in this small town, but there's some type of reputation that surrounds this estate and who used to live there. But if you're sitting there thinking, Liv, I'm not a horror reader, neither am I. There are not a ton of horror elements to this story, but in all of Darcy Coates' books, she does have a huge mystery element. So you're not just focused on the gore and the horror and all the spooky things. There's actually a logical mystery of things happening and why they're happening, and that's what I really love about her writing. But this book specifically, I would start with. I feel like it's very well-rounded. You're gonna get a great taste of what her writing is like. Most of her books are under 300 pages, and I also flew through this one in one sitting. The next author I have to recommend you is one for the Agatha Christie and Nancy Drew fans. That is Benjamin Stevenson's Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. I will say his writing is definitely an acquired taste. He adds lots of humor and also a lot of narrative to his story, but the way his stories are written are kind of like locked room stories where you have a bunch of characters, you're trying to rule them out, and you're trying to figure it out before the book ends. So to me, that's a great way to try to fly through a book, is try to finish the ending before the book ends, and I feel like a lot of people can enjoy Benjamin Steven for that reason. Now I have a couple romance recommendations for you. If you've been around here long enough, you know that I'm very picky about my romance, so you can probably guess who I added to this list. But there is a very underrated author that I feel like could be great for those mystery thriller readers, and that is Gracie Ruth Mitchell. Juniper Bean resorts to murder. If you are wanting a murder mystery, but also something with romance that's super easy to fly through, she has written 2 books in this series. This book was such a good time though. We have a small town mystery, but then we also have like a small town romance. Juniper Bean somehow ends up rooming with a male named Aiden who she starts having feelings for, but then they also end up finding a dead body in the town, and so they end up trying to solve the mystery. Juniper Bean is also a very quirky but relatable, fun character, and the writing, again, so easy to get through. I feel like that's what I really love in romance books, is when we have another sort of plot going on to keep me invested in the story. So if you are also that type of person, you need some type of mystery or something added to your romance, definitely try out this series. Speaking of other elements added to romance books, let me recommend The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. You do not have to understand the magical elements happening in this book, but if you do want another added surprise element to the story, this is essentially about a girl that moves into her aunt's old apartment. Her aunt has passed away, and somehow there's like time traveling involved. And there's just so many fun but emotional elements weaved into this story. I definitely don't want to say much more than that. All I can recommend is always read the author's notes, especially when it comes to her books, because you will have an even bigger connection to her and her stories after you do that, especially with this one. My current all-time favorite romance reader is Abby Jimenez. Not only are her books so easy to fly through, but she has written 2 romance series at this point. So again, if you fly through the first one, you have more books to look forward to with some of the same characters, which I also think is not only super fun, but also really motivating, because when I read romance series, I want to know if I'm going to see some of my new favorite characters pop up again. But Abby Jimenez will make you laugh until you cry. Like, she just has a way play with words and such a great sense of humor. There's no way you are not going to be entertained by her books. I'm not going to go too into depth about what this book is about because I'm sure you guys have heard about Abby Jimenez already, but of course I have to mention her, and this is just my extra little push to get you to pick up one of her books if you have not yet. But I will say, if you're one of those people that's not looking for magic and you're not really looking for mystery in your romance, but you do want something wholesome and sweet, I definitely recommend any of Courtney Walsh's books. Specifically her Christmas books are absolutely amazing, but I really love this one as well. It is a hockey romance, and usually I could care less about sports romances. Like, that is not my genre or my thing, but she made me love hockey because of this book. Our main character actually ends up being the assistant to this very popular hockey player who's kind of grumpy. He's recently switched hockey teams and she kind of has to show him the ropes. So even if you aren't a sports romance person, she definitely has other books you could check out, but Courtney Walsh is definitely my go-to girly. Then I have a couple more mixed media contemporary kind of romance, kind of toxic relationship type of situation books, which isn't my normal, but hear me out. Daisy Jones in the Six is one of my all-time favorite romance contemporary books. This is about a band in the 70s and you kind of unfold their story, but this book makes these characters feel so real, and the interview style makes the book fly by so quickly. And if you aren't aware, there's also a show adaptation on Prime for this as well. That adaptation was absolutely perfect in my opinion. I sobbed my eyes out. If you want some type of emotional romance, but also suspense and 70s vibes, like, this book was so good. You don't even have to like music to read this book. And another recent favorite of mine who also said she was inspired by Daisy Jones in the Six is Lane Fargo's The Favorites. In this book we follow two ice dancers and their whole journey from when they were very small, from when they became adults, and all of the rough, crazy things that they went through. I could not put this down. You have to listen to the audio for this one. It's a full cast narration. There's an interview after every chapter. This was so messy and so chaotic, but personally I loved it. I could not put it down. I feel like I was reading some type of messy, chaotic, like mystery suspense novel. I did not know what was going to happen, and no, you don't have to care about ice skating to read this. This book is very popular for very good reason, and if you're still sitting on it, I urge you to pick this up as soon as you can. My last recommendation, and also my biggest tip, is to read a graphic novel or a manga, specifically if you've never read one before. I have a couple of my favorites here, and if you want to read something that you're familiar with or that is somewhat of a comfort read, you could start with Anne of Green Gables, a graphic novel, or you could read a reimagining of The Secret Garden on 81st Street. I will say I have not read this one yet, but I absolutely love this one. I have bought everything that Brenda Thumler has written and also illustrated. Anne of Green Gables is such a popular story, and the way she handled this was so well done. So if you want something that's heartwarming that you're familiar with, you could definitely check out Anne of Green Gables. But if you're also wanting to try something a little bit different, this is a middle grade graphic novel retelling of The Secret Garden. So personally, if you've never read a graphic novel before, you could start with something that you're already familiar with. Just look for it in a different format, like a graphic novel, or there's also a manga of Anne of Green Gables that you could try. Another one by Brenda Thumler that I had to throw in because it is one of my all-time favorites is Sheets. This one is actually a series as well. This book has some of my favorite art style ever. This book follows our main character Marjorie, whose mother recently passed away, and her and her father owned a laundromat, and there is a little sheet that may or may not end up coming to life, and they end up being friends. I absolutely love their relationship, and Marjorie's kind of like an outcast and doesn't have friends, so this little sheet is the cutest thing ever. The other books in this series are just as good as this first one. Another recent favorite of mine from last year that I feel like never gets talked about is Ghost Book. This one is a middle grade book, but it has a lot of heart and a lot of depth to it. Our main character named Julie Chen, who saves a ghost from being sucked kind of like into the underworld. There's a specific day of the year where the gates open up and there's a bunch of ghosts that roam the town. There's so much depth and layers to this story. It's not only spooky, but it's magical and it's memorable, and the art style is honestly super fun, super easy to fly through. There's even a couple high stakes moments where I was like, okay, where are we going with this story? Enola Holmes is going to be for the mystery thriller lovers out there, and also if you are familiar with Enola Holmes and you've seen the movies, I feel like this would be absolutely perfect. There are 3 stories within this one graphic novel, and I believe there's 3 volumes out now. This book has the same humor as the movies, which I really enjoyed. We also see a relationship between Enola and Sherlock, which was also super cool to see. And again, you don't even have to read this whole thing in one go. You could just read one story in between other books. So there's definitely lots of ways that you could get into graphic novels. This one specifically was really fun. Last but not least, if you are not a manga reader, let me suggest to you 2 of my top favorites that I would suggest. The first one being Spy Family. You've probably heard of it. I also have Witch Hat Atelier. But if you are a big graphic novel reader and you have yet to venture into manga, I feel like these 2 would be the perfect choice to start with. Spy Family has a found family trope, and this little girl's named Anya. She ends up being adopted by this couple, and the couple don't know that each other are kind of like assassins. And there's also this bigger goal and mystery and things that they're trying to uncover and do, but this is full of action and also humor. Anya is one of my favorite characters of all time. And then we also have Witch Hat Atelier, which is a little bit more tame, but it is about a girl named Coco who accidentally ends up cursing her mother somehow. She is on a journey to win her mother back, but she realizes in order to do that, she has to learn magic. She has to go to an academy. It is a little bit more academic, which is super fun, but there's lots of action in each novel as well. The artwork is incredibly detailed and super stunning. This is definitely not a series that's going to be boring to look at, even though it is black and white. If you're not used to it, there's lots of detail packed into this. This series I could recommend to almost all ages as well. I feel like children and adults alike would love this series, although it does get a little bit dark as we go on. But this series is full of surprises and heart and so many emotions as we follow these characters. Well, my friends, there's my compiled list of not only some of my favorite books, but definitely books I recommend checking out if you are in a reading slump. A lot of these are super fast paced, or I highly recommend reading a manga or a graphic novel in between bigger books, especially if you've never tried them before. Hopefully we can survive this reading slump together, and hopefully this video was helpful for you and you found some great recommendations. I appreciate you stopping by and clicking on this video. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next one.